my teacher training came through Mahayana Buddhism, and it was a great deal. I mean, a lot of memorization. I had flashcards, a stack of them like this, for every time we had a test, and I would keep them with me. I had always had flashcards in my pocket and try memorizing this stuff, and I'm not very good at memorization, but I learned a lot. It was just really it was intense, and it was very confusing. And then when I went from Mahayana to Theravada, things got very simple from the standpoint of Theravada is translated as the teachings of the elders. So what they did was take the Buddhist teachings and use those exclusively for the teachings, and that's Theravada Buddhism. And thankfully, the Buddha said, I would like to quote him, but my Pali, the Pali language that I speak is horrible. But he said that he teaches two things. Yeah, that's where Mark comes in. Mark is a fluent speaker. He said that I teach suffering and the cessation of suffering. That's what the Buddha said. His whole menu was suffering and the cessation of suffering. In other words, he taught what suffering was and how to stop suffering. That's all he taught. And which really makes it simple, you would think. And so he spent the next 51 years teaching what suffering was and how to stop it, how to get away from that suffering. And one of the more profound teachings, all of his teachings were basically his insights. He would meditate and he'd have these aha moments like we all have, and his teachings were based off of that. And the reason he taught these things is to help us along our path, to speed our path along, so that when we would have the same insight or a similar insight, a similar aha moment, we would think, oh yeah, that's the teaching on whatever that the Buddha familiarized ourselves with, and one of the primary teachings that we can use in those lines is the teachings of the three universal truths. And these universal truths, probably more than anything, explain what suffering is and why we suffer and how to get out of it. These three very basic truths, or these three basic teachings. And they might sound familiar to you because they are in the Anapanasati, which means that one of the books I wrote is basically about this. The Anapanasati is a meditation practice called mindfulness of breathing, and in the fourth tetrad of that is basically these truths, these three universal truths. And the very first one is that everything is impermanent and changing.
Everything is what?
Impermanent and changing. So let me just read what these are, then I'll come back and talk about them, and then how we can use them in our meditation. The three universal truths. Number one, everything is impermanent and changing. Number two, impermanence leads to suffering. And number two, impermanence leads to suffering, making life imperfect. And number three, the self is not personal and unchanging. So I want to clarify that. It says that the self is not personal, and I would add another word, not unchanging. The self is not personal and not unchanging, so it's constantly changing. So again, everything is impermanent and changing. Number two, impermanence leads to suffering, making life imperfect. And number three, the self is not personal and unchanging. So first of all, when we hear these things, like the very first universal truth that everything is impermanent and changing, I know for myself, the first time I heard that, I try to prove that. I try to somehow prove it wrong, or in other words, I was investigating. Oh, is that, in my mind is like, is that right? There's got to be something that's not impermanent. There's got to be something that's static, that never changes. And it doesn't take long for us to realize that that is the absolute truth, that everything is constantly changing. Everything is in a flux. Everything is, flowing and moving, from moment to moment. There's many different ways we could look at this. From the cellular level, of course, we take a microscope and we can see that everything is changing. Everything is fluent. It's made out of, the structure that everything is made out of is very, very loose, even though it appears to be solid. And this isn't just material things, but also immaterial things like our thoughts. Our thoughts are very, very malleable. They change all the time. When we think of have an idea about something, that can change as well, right? I mean, our opinion changes of things. I always use the analogy of the diamond being the hardest substance in the world. We think that would not change if it was just sitting down and nobody touched it or anything like that. But over time, and time is one of the primary elements that is behind this change, that even a diamond, will change with time. It loses its shine. I mean, we all know that. Even from nobody touching it, the shine will change. And on a very molecular, say it again? Molecular level. Molecules, it changes. I mean, we just have to keep an eye on it, with a microscope, and we can see that it changes. So whether it's material or immaterial, everything is changing. And that, and the second one is that that impermanence leads to suffering. So the idea behind that, or the truth behind that, is that once we find something that seemingly provides happiness for us, it changes. And if we're not aware of that, we will suffer. Even though we're aware of it, we will suffer to a certain degree, because we finally find something that provides happiness, and then it's gone, or it changes, or we don't look at it the same way. It can be people, places, things, or ideas, or anything. And so none of this is brought up to cause any unhappiness or anything like that. Actually, it's quite the contrary, because we want to be aware. We want to be aware of where suffering comes from, so that we can greet it face to face. When something happens, we can look at the impermanence of something. Like if we are unhappy in the moment, we can ask ourselves, what aspect of this impermanence is not working out for me? And a lot different things. A lot of it is the element of time, which causes things to change. And sometimes we like time. We like it from the standpoint of not having to wait so long for something, and sometimes we like it when time flies by, but sometimes it goes by too fast, and we don't appreciate that. We don't like growing old. That's an aspect of time, When we're young and children, I can't wait until I'm an adult and I can do what I want. We just the complete opposite. So time, and I say the element of time because it is an element. It has everything to do with this change that we're looking at. idea of boundaries is another thing. So when we do find something that causes happiness for us, we don't settle for that one particular thing. We usually want more. We don't remain satisfied with what we have. If somebody would give us the world, we would probably be looking at the moon next. And if somebody, well, we'll give you the moon, and if somebody would give us the moon, we would look at the solar system, and if they gave us the solar system, we might be looking at, you get the point. We would want to, capture more and have more because of the nature of how we are as humans. But if we realize that this is going to happen, we stand a much better chance of not falling trap to that, not falling, victim to our wants and needs. The other area, the self is not personal and unchanging. And a lot of times when we think of impermanence, we forget to include this stuff, the body and the mind. And the Buddha wanted to make it very clear that what we are is impermanent as well, so that we aren't dissatisfied, that we thought, like the Buddha, when his father kind of tricked him into telling him that if you stay in the kingdom, you won't grow old, and you won't get sick, and then you won't die. If you stay within the kingdom here, you'll have everything you want. And that's because the seer, they predicted when the Buddha was born, he said either your son will be a king or he'll be a renunciant, like a monk. And of course he turned into a monk and left the kingdom. But first, before he did that, he went outside of the kingdom and he saw aging, and he saw sickness, and he saw death. And this is the aspect of impermanence. So nobody is immune to this aspect of impermanence, especially when it comes to our bodies. And whether we like it or not, our body is changing constantly. Now, that doesn't mean that I personally don't like the word death, and that because from the standpoint of my beliefs, I don't really believe in a death that there's an end to this and then it's final, like there's nothing else. My belief is that there is this change, that the body kind of exhausts itself, and then it starts changing form. Basically, one fellow told me that the body turns into a bag of fertilizer, and that's pretty accurate, really. I mean, we can go to the hardware store and pick up most of the elements that make up this body, in a bag of fertilizer. Most of them can be found in the horticulture section of a hardware store. But when we look at the mind and the transference of the mind and how, and people's beliefs of the mind, again, my belief is that the mind constantly changes along with the body, even if we would magically migrate from one life to a next. And I don't think it's that magical, really. I'm just kind of having fun with that. But when the mind and the body dies, the Buddha basically said that the only thing that goes from one life to the next is the karma, the results of our actions. We talked about that last week. All the things that happen from previous lives go on to the next life, and that really builds our character. That builds our persona, who we are as people. And so the Buddha really wanted to make that clear, that we are not permanent, and we are changing, and we and in so much of saying that, he's also saying that there is no permanent end I mean, there is no permanent end, the ending point to this life either. And that was really a big part of his teaching. And partially because he was brought up in the Indian culture. He was actually born a Hindu, and they have a huge belief in rebirth, or actually in reincarnation. Yeah, in Buddhism, it's not necessarily reincarnation, but it is rebirth, and we can talk about that later if somebody wants that defined a little bit more. But what we're really dealing with is the idea of impermanence, and there's a fine line between using impermanence and, or basically how to use it. So if we can accept this idea that our world and everything in it is impermanent, it's much easier to do one key thing, and that is to be able to surrender or to let go of these aspects, anything that is sticky that we should be letting go of, that can provide happiness for us. And as meditators, and when we meditate, the primary function of the practice is to be able to surrender or to be able to let go. And what each person discovers that what they should be letting go of is really personal and individual for each person. We could go around the room and ask each person, what would you benefit by letting go of? And everybody would of course have a different answer. But if we understand the teaching of impermanence, it's much, much easier to accept that we have to let go, and that letting go becomes much, much easier. And there's one aspect of the idea of letting go, really the opposite, we could say the opposite of letting go, is the idea of control. And that's also happens to be the hardest thing to let go of, is our control of things. And with a little I'm going to read something here. With a little forward thinking, we can determine that everything alive today will be gone in 100 years. Everybody alive will be dead in 100 years, right? We can further assume that our world will look completely different in 1,000 years, and that many of the buildings standing will now not be standing. It is the element of time that works in tandem with control. I'm going to back up here. It is the element of time that works in tandem with decay and change. If we push the element of time, we are attempting to control. Again, if we push the element of time, we're attempting to control. Control is in direct contrast to impermanence and natural change. To feel as if we are in the flow is a popular phrase, but one that is in line with what needs to be done in order to minimize the effects of change. To know that we are a product of change, and to know that we can participate with change in a natural way, is how we can live with and use change to complement life. People that make wise investments are actually taking this principle and applying it in a healthy way. So again, somebody that makes an investment, like a financial investment, understand this change of time, and they're able to actually control their emotions behind it by using it in a favorable way. People that make wise investments are actually taking this principle and applying it in a healthy way. Those that push and want things to be different than what they currently are fighting against the natural flow of change. So again, we can use change to our advantage, but if we fight against it, we are fighting against nature. because everything naturally changes, right? So our job as a meditator and as a spiritual being is to find the balance between that, to understand that everything is changing. It's like this is the element of time marching by. This is the past, this is the future, and of course we want to stay with that. And if we have enough foresight to see what's going to happen in the future, we can use time and this element of impermanence to our advantage. And one of the ways is to understand and accept anything that we have to let go of, because it's not going to be with us in the future anyway. If we're struggling to hang on to something, eventually we're going to be letting go of it. And in some cases, if we let go of it sooner, it pays dividends by not allowing us to suffer during all of this. A lot of times people struggle their entire lives to hang on to something, and then what happens at the end of the life? They have to give it up anyway. And so we want to find this natural balance, or this point of harmony between the non-acceptance of time and this impermanence, to using this impermanence to our advantage. And that's what this meditation will be about. And again, I want to kind of stress that when we meditate, the primary thing is that we rest in the present moment. Any kind of insights that come up are part of that meditation. We're not usually using meditation to go in and discover anything, but what we do here is I do a little bit of guiding, and then after that guiding, it's kind of an invitation for us to rest in what the subject might be, but not necessarily use it and go into it and try to find answers, because that is not being present. In meditation, we want to focus on our meditation object, be present, and just see what happens. In this particular meditation, our main object is to watch this change, this impermanence as it flows by with us involved. As long as we're watching and recognizing this change and this flow, we are aware of it. And that's the key, to be aware. Awareness is king when it comes to understanding. And this is no exception with the teachings of the three universal truths, primarily impermanence. Yeah, please make yourself comfortable. Take a couple of nice deep breaths and notice how the body feels. Most people like to close the eyes. And some people, for whatever reason, might not wish to close the eyes. And if that's the case, just focus on something a few feet in front of you. And if your eyes get tired, feel free to close them. Meditation, again, is a practice of staying very, very present. And what that usually means is that we find a meditation object, something to focus on, something to concentrate on, and we use that to come back into this presence again and again. So this focal point is a tool that we use in our meditation. I suggest that we bring our attention to the breath. Notice the inhalation and the exhalation as we breathe in and out. And ask yourself inwardly, where do I feel the breath the most? And do I want to use this place, this spot, on the body as my meditation object, my point of focus. Even if you meditated 1,000 times before this, make sure that you know where that focal point is on the body, and bring your attention there now. We want to become very familiar with our meditation object, and it's usually something related to the breath. Some people use sounds. Some people use other sensations within the body. But almost always something in or on the body is the ideal object. And that's why the breath is a very good one. So even while we're sitting in meditation, we can notice the change. Every sound, every breath, every thought, every sensation, every feeling comes and goes, constantly changing, constantly flowing. The thought you have now is completely different than the thought you had just a moment ago. And we can use this change, this impermanence, as a part of our meditation practice just by knowing that it's rising and falling away. Something is always arising to our awareness, and then it falls away almost as fast as it has come into our awareness. This is happening moment by moment, again and again. And this is impermanence. If something came into our awareness and stayed there, all it simply is doing is lasting a little bit longer than most things. If we study and memorize something, we feel as if we're making it permanent, but it's not even close to being permanent. It's just something that's a little bit longer lasting than the other things. Even if we had something like a phone number that we remembered our entire lives, at some point that number would be impermanent, particularly in our mind. Everything is constantly changing for us, and that's actually a gift. The boredom that we would feel as a human, if everything remained the same, would be unbearable. There would be no point. There would be no challenges. There wouldn't be any reason for life if things didn't change, if things didn't move forward. It could even be said of the perfect, peaceful world. We all wish for peace, world peace. A perfect place to live where everybody gets along. Everybody has enough to eat. The gas is cheap. Housing's not expensive. Lumber's not overpriced. On and on, but we would always want something to be different, even if we did have this perfect world. One person's idea of a perfect world is not the same as another person's perfect world. And so we have a contrast. Even in a perfect world, there is contrast. And so this duality is a part of life. This change, this contrast, this flow is a part of life. And when we find something in life that is working for us, we should see it as that this is something that just happens to be working at the time. We should accept it and appreciate it and know that this could end at any time, and it will end at some point. It'll end from the standpoint of change. We've all probably had the best job in the world that we just really enjoyed, and everything was perfect. And then a few weeks into the job, we realize that, this is a job. I have to be here at a particular time, and I have to do these particular chores or these particular things. And so that the favoritism of that job changed. And this is true with everything. And change is not necessarily something that changed from good to bad or from right to wrong. So we can have something in our life and appreciate it. We can even have something in our life that we dearly love, but there's still change happening. And that's the point. The point is that we have to learn to accept these different, very finite degrees of change, and the big changes as well. We have to be prepared to say to ourselves that everything is impermanent, everything does change, and that is a part of nature, it's a part of life. And there's nothing sad or cruel about it. It's part of the contract that we signed when we came aboard this thing called life. Because again, without this change, our life would be very, very different. It would be unlivable. And we suffer because we want things to be different, but we want things to be different in such a way that we have control. And first of all, things will be different. We just have to learn to have the patience and see it, notice this change. There's nothing wrong with it. So we suffer because we have the idea that something should be other than what it is. Either more or less of this or that. And so if we have something that we really appreciate, something that is dear to us, if it's an object, or even if it's a thought or an idea, that will change. And our opinion of it will change as well. So this change is happening from different sides, different viewpoints. And so even when we're sitting in presence, in meditation, focusing on the breath, we owe it to ourselves to notice this movement of change. We can see it in the sound, in the breath itself, and mostly in our own thoughts, our ideas, the things that come up within the mind. So we'll spend the remainder of this meditation in silence, focusing on our meditation object. And the invitation again is to notice everything that is changing, which is literally everything. And to be accepting of this. And use this for to be okay with this change and let it be a part of your practice of letting go, whatever it is that you might be thinking in terms of surrendering or letting go of. Coming to the end of this meditation, take a little deeper than normal inhalation of the breath, bringing energy into the body. Exhaling. Take a few more nice deep inhalations. Bring yourself back into the room. You can bring your palms in front of us if you like, in front of your heart, together. May each one of us and all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. May no harm come to us. May no difficulties come to us. May we all meet with spiritual and worldly success. May we have the patience, the courage, and the understanding to meet and overcome any problems or difficulties that we might face.